Hi, my name is Rebecca Burek, and I've been paper crafting with Paper Source for about 15 years. One project we come back to over and over again at Paper Source is handmade stationery, and one of our favorite ways to make it is with heat embossing. So today I'm going to show you how to use a heat embossing tool. It's super easy, and then I'm going to show you different ways you can design your own gold embossed stationery. So let's get started. Here's what you'll find in your box. One heat embossing tool, a set of embossing pens, gold embossing powder, a Versamark watermark stamp pad, a floral wood block stamp, a set of folded A2 note cards, and then 3 different colors of envelopes. Heat embossing or stamp embossing is a process which creates a raised, glossy design on the surface of your paper, like this. In order to heat emboss something, you need these tools: a stamp or embossing pen, ink, embossing powder, and a heat tool. The floral stamp that you receive in your box may be this one or maybe a different floral design. All of the designs were created by our design team here in Chicago. Once the designs were made, they were turned into rubber, which was then hand cut and hand mounted onto this wood block. The image you see on the top of the wood block was in fact stamped by one of the stamps, so this is exactly the image that you're going to get. The ink in your box is a clear ink. It creates a watermark on the paper and is perfect for the embossing powder to stick to. Embossing powder comes in all different colors. In this case, we're using a gold, and the powder has resin in it that melts when heated up and creates that raised, glossy effect. The heat tool is what you're going to use to melt down your powder. One common question is, can I use a hair dryer? Hair dryers don't actually work because the airflow is too high. It will blow the powder away, and the temperature is too low, so it won't melt it. So one thing to note about this heat tool is it does get up to 650 degrees, so you never want to point it at your fingers. And you also want to be conscious of your work surface. If you have a table that is heat sensitive, maybe because of the finish on the wood, you're going to want to either protect that surface or use a different surface that can't be damaged from the heat. Let's go ahead and open this up. One thing to look for when you're opening up your heat tool is this little piece here. Don't throw it away. This is a kickstand that you're going to attach to your heat tool so that when you're working with it, you can kind of prop it up on the table. So you're going to flip your heat tool so it's right side up, which you can tell by the writing, and you're going to attach the kickstand into these little holes on either side. There you go. And when you're not using the kickstand, you can just flip it down like that to make it a little easier to store. When you're using it, flip it like that and then prop it up. One thing to note about using a brand new heat tool just out of the packaging is there do tend to be a little bit of like factory oils on the surface of the heat tool, and so your first couple times using it you might smell a little bit of a burning smell. and maybe even see a little bit of smoke coming off the end. Don't be alarmed by that. That should fade within the first couple of uses. If you do continue to see that afterwards, it's likely that you're holding the heat tool too close to your paper and you need to back it off a bit. So let's start heat embossing. This is a very simple process and I'm going to walk you through step by step. We're going to start out by just using a scrap of cardstock. So grab whatever you have to practice on, and we'll even turn this scrap into our first piece of stationery. So go ahead and remove the lid to your ink pad and grab your stamp and coat it with ink. You might need to move that around to cover the whole surface. Make sure that whole thing has that glossy shine to it. And then go ahead and press down evenly on your stamp, trying not to rock the stamp back and forth, which can create a blurry image. I'm using a textured paper, so I'll press down a little extra firmly so I get an even coating. And it's very faint watermark, which you can barely see, but it will appear when I coat it with powder. And I'm just gonna liberally sprinkle this powder onto the surface. Make sure that's completely covered. And then we can reuse all that extra. So I'm just gonna tap it back into the jar. I have a little bit of embossing powder clinging to the paper still. So I'm just gonna try to tap that off. You can flick the back like that to clean it off. Or you can even kind of wipe it with your finger or a brush if you have any stubborn bits that are still clinging. So now it's time to heat this up. So when you are melting down the embossing powder, you're gonna simply turn on the switch on the heat tool, hold it 1 to 2 inches away from the surface, and wait for that surface to transition from this sort of sandy looking texture to that glossy, shiny surface. There you have it. You can cut this out into a square or a circle. I'm going to go ahead and do a circle by placing this glass over top of my image, centering it the best I can. And now I'm going to trace this and cut it out. So using a pencil, I'll just lightly trace around this cup. This cup has a little bit of a beveled edge, so I might have to kind of clean up my lines a little bit when I remove it, but it doesn't have to be perfect. And we'll erase any pencil marks. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut it out with my scissors. There you go. Now I'm just going to go back in and erase any pencil marks that are still visible. Now I'm ready to start putting together my stationery. So for this card design, I'm going to add my embossed image to the folded card, and I'm going to add a message below using my embossing pens. You received a set of 3 pens with a medium tip, broad tip, and brush tip. For this message, I'm going to use the medium tip pen. Whenever I plan on writing a message onto a card, I like to write and emboss the message first and then attach the design after. But one thing that helps is just to set it in place when you're writing, so you have a sense of where to place your message. I'm going to go ahead and put mine right about here. I like to leave a little bit of a margin between the bottom and the design itself. The embossing pens have a pink tip, and this is similar to the Versamark ink that you have in your stamp pad. It's a little bit of a pink shade, but ultimately it dries clear. But it will basically be the glue for your embossing powder after you write your message. So I'm just going to say hello on this card. And when the ink is pink, you know it's still wet and still has that adhesive quality to it. If it starts to turn clear, that means you're running out of time to sprinkle your powder on. So I'm going to go ahead and move this out of the way now and sprinkle my powder on. Before I put this back in the jar, I'm just going to lay a little scrap paper down to catch any of the extra. You can see I missed a spot, but easy enough to go ahead and recoat it and cover it with the powder. So I'm just tapping the excess powder off, and now it's ready to heat emboss. And now I've got my metallic hello for my stationery. If you notice that when you heat emboss your card, if it starts curling upwards like this, one trick to help reverse that is to actually flip your card over and just heat the back a little bit to help relax the paper in the opposite direction, like this. So now that I have my message complete, I'm going to go ahead and add the design. You can adhere your design with a glue stick or double-sided tape, or what I'm going to use, which are foam squares. I really like using these in card making because they add some dimension to the card. So there's 2 different sizes in here. There's these little 1/4" squares, and there's the larger, roughly 1/2" squares. And so basically what these are is a 3D foam that is double-sided. So I can flip that over and start by peeling these off. I can place a few around. Just give them a little extra press. And now what you do is just peel off the backing that is on there to get to the sticky part. Sometimes it's a little stubborn and coming off. Helps to use your nails to get under there. Now it's ready to stick on. And there you have your first piece of stationery. And last step is just to pick out an envelope color, which I'm gonna go with this rose. Just slide that out. And you're all set to write a note and send it to somebody. Another approach to creating embossed stationery is to not be afraid to go over the edge of your card with your stamp. It's a great way to create a border that goes around the perimeter of the card. And then that leaves the center for adding whatever message you like, or even maybe gluing a photo on the center. So let's get started. So it's important to have a scrap piece of paper underneath your card so that you can go off the image and not stamp your table or whatever surface you're working on. And go ahead, ink up your stamp, and start working your way around the outside. And I'm trying to not overlap my flowers, but if you do overlap them, that's no big deal. That can create kind of a cool effect. And I'm re-inking each time. I'm gonna move that out of the way. You can also change the direction that you're holding the stamp to try to capture different portions of the floral image, or you can just kind of keep going in the same direction. And you can kind of vary how far into the card you're placing your stamp, or if you're just kind of peeking in the edge with one of the flowers. Okay, I'm getting close to the end. I've got maybe this much space left, so I might just peek a little bit in there so I have room for a bigger flower in the last slot I have here. This is where there might be a touch of overlap, but again, that's totally fine. So I'm gonna use a fresh piece of scrap paper to sprinkle on the embossing powder, because otherwise the embossing powder is gonna cling to all of those images on the scrap paper, which is just a little bit of waste of powder. One thing about the Versamark ink is it does stay wet for a little bit of time so you are able to go all the way around the border and it's still workable. But you don't want to let it sit and dry after you've stamped it. You want to go ahead and add the powder right away. So now you can see the border now that the powder's on there. So next I'm just going to clean up a little bit of that extra powder and then I can heat it. So I've cleaned off some of that excess powder and it's ready to heat emboss. One tip, if you're noticing you're getting a lot of powder that's sticking to your card where you don't want it and it's hard to remove, it might be that there's just some extra static or maybe oils from your fingers that is making that cling. One little tip with that is to rub your card with dryer sheets before you stamp it, and sometimes that can help it from getting all that extra powder. So let's go ahead and heat set this. Now we've got a beautiful metallic border. To finish off this design, I'm going to go ahead and lightly write a message in pencil in the middle, and then I'll trace over it with embossing pen and emboss it. So now I have my message on there in pencil, and I'm going to use my medium tip embossing pen to trace over it and emboss. So I have a little bit of extra there. I'm gonna just go ahead in there with a brush to remove that. it's time to melt it down. And now you have a beautiful thank you card. Now you can simply pair your thank you note with an envelope and it's ready to go. If you want to elevate the look of your stationery, some alternatives are to try using a greeting stamp for the center if you don't love your handwriting, or to add some color to your flowers. In this case, I used watercolor. You can do the same, or you can use colored pencil as well. Another technique you can use with embossing is called masking, where you hide part of the image that you're stamping. In this case, we're going to use masking to create an interior border, which you can then fill in with a message. So I've cut down a scrap of copy paper to business card size. I put some double-sided tape on the back and actually blotted it on my jeans to pick up some lint. That's my little trick to make double-sided tape repositionable. You can also blot it with your fingers, or if you have repositionable tape, you can use that. We're going to stick it on the center of the card. This is going to represent our frame. Just gently press down. And now we're going to stamp over top and over the edges of this box. Pressing down firmly, there is a little bit of a ridge we've created here. So pressing down firmly will prevent too much of a bald spot where the ridge is. Now I'm gonna do the opposite corner. And then I'm going to do 2 more impressions on the last 2 corners. Okay, now that I'm done with the stamp and the ink, I'm gonna just draw a border by tracing around this scrap of paper. So just being careful to hold that in place and then go around and sort of trace each edge with the pen. And this just kind of makes it look more finished. It also can fill in any maybe bald patches that happened because of that ridge. Now we're just going to gently peel this away, being careful not to tear your card. And we're going to add some embossing powder and see how it came out. So I'll check to see if I missed anything. It looks like it's totally covered. I did get some kind of fingerprints on there that picked up the embossing powder, so we'll just clean these off and then we'll heat set it. Now it's all cleaned up and ready to heat set. And there we have it. Now, all you need to do is add a message to the center. One way I like to add messages to my embossed stationery is with Peg's stamps. These are alphabet stamps that you can snap together to spell whatever you want. You can snap them horizontally and you can snap them together vertically. One trick I like to do if I am snapping together multiple words vertically is just taking a letter I'm not using, flipping it upside down, and snapping that together. Now when I stamp this will be a blank spot here, but it'll leave that perfect space and make sure my words are lined up. And you get a result that looks something like this. Pair it with an envelope and it's ready to go. Another way you can use stamping embossing is not just for the cards, but for the envelopes too. So I'm going to show you how you can get this effect on one of your envelope flaps. Simply slide a piece of scrap paper under your flap and then stamp along the edge. Next, you add your powder and emboss. Clean up any extra powder and then go ahead and heat set. Now you have a beautiful embossed envelope, and you can also play around with embossing along the front side next to the address as well. Thank you so much for taking this workshop. I hope you learned a lot and are excited to continue exploring heat embossing. We would love to see your creations, so if you're posting photos of your handmade stationery to Instagram, please tag us #PaperSource. We'll see you soon.